Williamson earned his undergraduate degree in mathematics some time ago, and then earned his PhD from Stanford University. He's been at Harvard University since 1972. And is that a joint
83, since 83.
Since 83. Oh, you weren't corrected either.
Right.
And then joint appointment at Wisconsin?
Now.
Okay. He also has written extensively, so over 200 research articles, over 20 books and monographs. He has been an editor or on the editorial board at many journals, including Review of Economics and Statistics, and the Journal of Economic History. He has been an officer in many academic societies, including past president of the Economic History Association. And I guess I just want to close with one last thing. On his CV, he has a little section called Awards and Appointments That Really Matter. And I just thought I'd read a little section there. And it goes, awards that really matter are twice recipient of the Galbraith Prize for the best teacher in the graduate economics program awarded by Harvard's graduate students. The Energizer Bunny Award, given to me by all my past PhD students from Wisconsin and Harvard. The Hughes Prize for Teaching Excellence, awarded by the Economic History Association, and the Hoops Prize, Best Harvard Senior Honors Thesis of the Year, received by 10 of my students.
Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here. It's the first time I've been here, that is, at this university. It's the first time I've been in the South Islands. It's the first time I've been in New Zealand, not counting the airport bit often. So it's a pleasure being here. This is written with two other guys, Bronco at the World Bank and Peter Linder at UC Davis, who has long been a colleague and friend and a collaborator of mine. And all three of us have been worrying over a long period of time about patterns of inequality, their determinants, and all that stuff. I spent a lot of my life kind of worrying about the Kuznets curve, but I thought the great questions were not whether you saw it, but when you didn't see it, why didn't you see it? When the theory was so powerful in suggesting you should see it. Now I think I know the answer. Let's see if I can figure this sucker out. What is the red sun thing? Don't push on. It'll abort? Oh, we go abort, okay. Okay, so here are the questions that intrigue us and everybody else, and that is, does the Industrial Revolution breed inequality? Or is it pretty much the same on either side of that event? And here's a second one, and that is pre-industrial societies, old ones and new ones. Do we see any significant difference in levels of inequality? And what about the impact of colonization? And have some part of the world have different levels of inequality than others? Latin America wears white hats and Asia wears black, the other way around. Asia wears white hats, Latin America wears black hats. And, when you simply introduce dummies after you've controlled for everything else. So does that show up in this longer term data as well? So I don't think we've got the answers yet. And the reason for that is we don't have very good evidence because inequality is a complex event like growth, and you're not going to answer questions, I don't think, by running regression panel data over the last 30 years on this issue, especially for inequality data, which is terrible and incomparable across countries. But I shouldn't stress that because you're going to see we got the same problem, but at least we got the long term. If you are willing to suck it in and go with data that is limited, and you'll see how it's limited, but basically to measure inequality as economic distance across means of cells and forget about the distribution within the cells, then you're on your way. And you can use this stuff that's called social tables, which I'll describe in a minute. The first observation that when I started getting interested in this, I was doing it with Peter Linder back in 1982. Can you believe that? My God, 1982. And we were doing England and Wales at those 3 dates. And you can get the social tables information to construct a full-size distribution of income if you're prepared to say something about distributions within these cells, as you'll see in a minute. So that was the first observation. Second one, as I contributed to this triage of guys was what we now call Mexico, New Spain, 1790-ish, where Manuel Abad y Guido, who was a bishop, Jesuit, apparently a vicious guy. But anyway, he was thoughtful and vicious, that's possible. And he collected information that has made estimates of distribution of income in that part of the world. And these two gentlemen at CEDA in Mexico City shared them with me back in 2004. And then Branco just dug up data for Peru, mid-19th century. So, but that's 26 years, you know, collecting a sample. So if there are any junior faculty in here who are not yet tenured, okay, you are tenured when you're junior faculty here, aren't you? Yeah. You look like the youngest faculty member. You shouldn't be doing this, right? You should be cranking out journal articles. Bang, you don't want to spend 26 years collecting data. But if you reach my age, you can do that. So there you are. Here's an example of a social table, France, around about the Revolution, where knowledgeable individuals have estimated the average incomes within these social groups. Then, in addition, there's evidence on family size within these social groups so that you can convert distributional information by income recipient to distribution of income by population using the cell information. Because we have no information about the distribution of income among landless laborers within that category. But it doesn't seem like a stretch to assume that the variance within that group is quite modest. It may be a bigger stretch when you start looking at the top groups, nobles and clergy, but not in the bottom groups, which are the big ones. In any case, that's the information we have in these social tables.
Can you say a word about where those come from, those social tables?
Yep.
They do a census
No. Well, as we're going to see in a minute, there are somewhere, in fact, there have been censuses, occupational censuses taken from which you can build up a size distribution. But that's not true of this case. There will be an individual, knowledgeable observer of this time, social arithmeticians they were called, who wrote treatise on the levels of income by social class. They're thinking in terms of the French class system at that time. And gave you enough information so you could construct this kind of data. Now, in a minute, I'm going to show you a table of all the observations you got so far, and they're not all social tables based. Some of them are better than that, as you'll see in a sec. Like right now. So here's a first set, starting Roman Empire in the year 14, based on social tables from Roman scholars who made estimates by class groups. In that case, there are 11 classes. There's the population we're talking about, 55 million. It's the whole empire, not just Italy. And estimates of GDP or GDI per capita, Madison-based. They're all Madison-based information. So it's all Geary, Camus, 1990 PPP dollars. And we take Madison as given, as we all do, even though we don't believe him. But there you are. They're numbers. So we use it. At least we try to make this data set consistent with a lot of other things that Madison has been doing, as you'll see in a sec. So I talked about the bottom one, Nueva España, that is New Mexico. Talked about the French one, talked about the Roman Empire one. Those are all social tables, but that's not true of the 1752 income census that was taken of 4 regions in Spain. There's Old Castile. Old Castile we're hanging on to. The other 3 we heaved. For example, Jerez, which is where we get the port, is actually an urban-based observation, and we don't want urban-based observations, especially for pre-industrial. It's simply too biased. We want the rural areas in there. But some of them have tax census. Some of them have tax census of dwelling rents, from which you can back out income from the dwelling rents and so on. So there are all these devices you can do to try to extract distribution of income across these social groups. Here's
Can I ask you a quick question about that, which is probably fairly commercial or something if you're doing that. I don't know if something like Madison does it. How are they going to solve the index on it, Paul? That Byzantium is saying, you know, estimated GDI is 710 for GDP, and then you look at Spain in the 18th century with 7.5,
Yeah.
and you're saying, I mean, it's like, why would you even bother?
Well, in a sense, there's no index number problem solved at all. Madison and anybody else who has to confront this issue tries to make a concession and reach some measure.
Is it a Big Mac test, sort of like, you know, how much is it, you know, a cow cost or something like that?
It'd be nice if we had that. But I mean, the one attractive thing about it is we're looking at pre-industrial societies whose structure and relative prices differ a lot less than comparing a less developed economy today and a rich industrial economy today, when issues of market baskets and all the rest really matter a lot in terms of constructing, making you construct PPP values and all that. But as I say, all we've done is said we're just going with Madison all the way on this. Okay, so there's another batch of them. So here are the, I'm stressing all this because the sample is really, you people out here, wouldn't it? He'd deal with a sample of 1, right? Les would do New Zealand, right? And that would be just fine. But the sample of 21 is hard to squeeze out. I think we squeeze out a lot. Squeeze out econometrics that you're going to believe. So we're working on adding on. So here they are. We now have Siam in our pocket from the just start of the Great Depression. We've got 3 Ottoman regions in the 16th century. That would be most of what we call Turkey now, the Balkans and the Levant, that is Syria et al. So we have those 3 bits giving us 4 more. We now have Chile on board, also another one of those occupational censuses for that period. Meiji Japan is coming. Tuscany is coming, 1427, a great data set. Probably one of the best here. We're hoping, and this hope seems to be confirmed. I think we're going to get it. So we're going to crank up this database from a little more than 20, 21 actually, to something closer to 30. I think it's going to make a difference in terms of what we can tease out of this. Okay, so that's a bit about the database. That's a bit about the kind of distributional information we're trying to exploit. Now let me start getting in with the stories. Here's a fact, and that is the average incomes in these ancient societies are usually twice that of the subsistence level. Where do we get the subsistence level? The subsistence levels are, again, PPP adjusted, are ones that are commonly used by the World Bank now in terms of analysis, and we've exploited them as well. We're going to have to, however, as you're going to see, appeal to Colin Clark, who has dealt with this issue 50 years ago and told us to watch out. Tropical areas are different in terms of subsistence, so we have to come back to that issue. But anyway, you know, average income about twice that of subsistence income. That's the kind of range of income. Today it's immense, right? And it's much smaller. Okay, it implies, I take it, that given what subsistence is, that is survival, and keeping subsistence income for 80 or 90% of the population at a level which allows them to replicate themselves, means with low average incomes, not much left over for the elite to rip off. So the possibility, even for the most greedy of leaders, elite leaders at that time, they're going to have a hard time in poor societies to rip off a lot of surplus. And therefore the possibility for inequality, as conventionally measured, will be more modest under those circumstances, one would think. Okay, if that's true, then what happens when, even if it's slow, even if improvement is slow to take place prior to an industrial revolution, if there's an improvement in societies over time in terms of economic performance, who gets the gravy? What happens to the rising surplus? Does it trickle down or not? And does it increase the possibility of rising inequality as the amount of surplus the elite can strip off increases, or do they not exploit that option? Do they exploit it or not? Are they able to exploit it or not? So that's a query that interests us, which implies a whole new way. I think no one's been thinking of it in these terms, and that is trying to distinguish actual inequality, which all the literature, all the empirical literature on the Kuznets curve and all the rest is focused on. That is, let's measure inequality and then see whether it rises and falls as Kuznets predicted, and add on other variables you think matter, to ask a different question, that is, let's measure, the inequality we want to measure is what's possible. What is the level of inequality possible that could be generated by any economy at any one point in time with certain attributes, and then compare it with its actual inequality and look at the difference. And the difference we're going to call the extraction ratio. That is how much actually they extracted from the society given the possibilities that were available. Okay, so imagine you can divide a society into two groups. Those masses at the bottom, a lot of them, who are getting subsistence income, and the elite that are protecting them, beating up on them, whatever, who are getting the residual surplus. And let's assume that there's no variance within these two cells. If you're a subsistence worker, there are some good ones and bad ones. The variance is trivial around subsistence, and less true perhaps, but let us assume that in the elite, the benign leader shares it equally or has to share it equally with others, or otherwise they revolt. So let's ignore the distribution within the two groups right now. And assume also that there's no overlap between the two classes. Probably not, certainly not going to be true. There are going to be some lousy economists who don't get very much, and some great economists or lucky economists that get a lot, and they spill over different groups, and well, we're ignoring that in terms of these definitions. So again, it's only variance between classes rather than within that we're starting off to measure anyway. So under those assumptions, that's what the Gini simplifies to, which is a measure we're going to be using throughout. We don't think differences in these measures are going to matter much, but we're going to try to show you why we can make that assertion. So average per capita income in the denominator there, so 1 over it times the spread in average incomes between ith and j classes, and then the weights, population share weights. Gives you the Gini. And then you can diddle with that Gini. First you can construct this income measure for the elite, H for high, so that's the income accruing to the elite group. So you take total income, first term on the upper left, total income being generated by the society, that is the average income, total number of folks in, and then subtract off what you have to pay to the subsistence workers so that they'll survive. And 1 minus epsilon, epsilon is the elite, E for the elite number, share of the elite, and 1 minus that, of course, is the rest. So that gives you the residual on top and divided by the number of guys in the elite group. And that converts to that expression there. It's starting to look cool because it tells you it's going to be driven by the numbers the elite share, the number of folks that are in the elite group, by the mean income and by the subsistence income. You got those three parameters, you're off and running.
Explain why are we looking at the inequality possibility frontier as opposed to kind of standard measure of inequality? Is all data driven that this is more conducive to working with the data we have?
Well, we're going to look at both of them actually. We're going to look at the actual inequalities and the inequality possibilities. The inequality possibility frontier, you'll see in a minute, is driven by a commitment to theory. We're going to insist, that that all these combinations, subsistence and all that stuff, is going to drive the amount of inequality that can be squeezed out of the system. And that will be just that much that keeps the subsistence reproducing. Just that much. So all the surplus above that level is being extracted by the elite.
What they could produce in terms of inequality if they don't.
Right, because then, great, because Bob, then you look at the actual inequality, compare it with what could be, and get the difference. That's what they're extracting from the system, and we know what they could have and what they did extract. And if there's a difference, then you want to know what's the political economy that got that result, that embedded the labor market systems and all these other systems that evoke that result. So we want both these measures, and so we can look at the difference. Okay, well, you can fiddle around with this thing, get that expression, and then it's in the paper. End up with that one. I think you can simplify it still more, but right here, now this alpha simply, it tells you the ratio of the mean income to the subsistence income. So the spread, the distance between subsistence and the average income in the system. So that one parameter and then epsilon, and you're home free in terms of saying something about Gini for a system where you're ignoring the variance within class. We're just looking between classes, because that's all the data we have to do this with. Okay, so yes, we said that. So when epsilon, for example, gets 0, you have one idiom in, then here's your expression for the Gini. But you don't, you have a few, you have idiom in and some thugs surrounding him, so you have to deal with that. Okay, we said that. We said that. Okay, so that should set you up in terms of the intent of this exercise, the kind of data we have, the intent of the exercise, and how we hope to use it. So let's not start talking about some of the results we're getting out of this. I described before the inequality extraction ratio, which is the relationship between the actual level of inequality as measured by the Gini and the maximum Gini that would be on this inequality possibility frontier, where you squeezed every bit of the surplus out. And that will be the inequality ratio. And so that's in percent. We will just observe a number, and then the question will be, has the elite decided benignly what this level will be, or is the elite have to accommodate conditions, revolutions from below, or more likely revolutions from within his group, which chooses a set of policies that yields this extraction ratio? Well, let's get the evidence first, and then we can start confronting some of those issues. This paper doesn't, but we hoped it. All right. Okay. So there you go. Here is the predicted, if you wish, the predicted inequality possibility frontier that comes out of the assertions of no variance within cell and the maximum inequality is going to be conditioned by the distance between subsistence and the average income of the economy. Of course, we haven't said anything about the possibility that the level of inequality and the institutions and so on that breed that level of inequality also generates a level of economic growth in the system. We're backing off from that question, one that a number of people have been trying to deal with, not well so far. So if we had one given observation, like this one here, then the extraction ratio is just going to be the distance between the actual inequality, in this case the A bit, and the predicted inequality given that level of income and given measured here in terms of the multiple of average income from subsistence. So it'd give you a number for the extraction ratio. There is that distance. Okay. So we got the socials tables. We've got these measures of inequality calculated, as well as what might be the maximum inequality. We can relax the assumption about within-group income variance, and we do that, but we have to make assumptions to do that, which are embedded in the appendices in the paper. And we report inequality extraction ratios trying to accommodate the possibility of variance within these cells, and that will be that bound there in the inequality extraction ratio. Some of these countries you can't do it. Okay, so fine. As I told you before, there turns out there's historic evidence that gives you really pretty good income distribution information, but typically it's for cities. So we can't do Paris in the middle of the medieval period. We can't do Jerez in 1752 and so on. You have to throw that data away. Though we are including, there are some observations like the Serbian village one, observations where we can't get it for the cities that are embedded in that region. We just get the rural information. Well, same kind of problem. I mean, we got these, we know that distributions are different for rural and urban areas, and, but our view is the weight for rural areas is humongous in pre-industrial societies. We've got the numbers. They're going to be like 5% for Serbia for the urban area. So while expecting an urban observation from Paris to tell you anything about France, forget it. It's a very small part of the total population of France, but it's not true the other way around. If we had everything on rural France and didn't have Paris, that would be, we'd accept that. And then throw in a dummy for the absence of Paris or something. Anyway, you get the idea. And you get the idea how lousy this data is, right? But you got to do the best you can. Okay, so we end up with 21 observations from India back to Rome. Another problem is these observations have different number of classes in them, as you can see. There are some of the ones that have small numbers, but most are double digits, so we're kind of happy with that. We get that from Madison, yeah, okay, fine, okay. So here's an example of the kinds of evidence that we get from these members of the sample. Gini 1 being the one no variance within the cells. Gini 2 guesses about variance within cells. And then calculating maximum feasible Gini along that inequality possibility frontier under various assumptions about the subsistence level. As we'll see, it matters a little bit, but not a hell of a lot. This one, you can see what the amount of variance there is between these observations in kind of the amount extracted or the maximum feasible Gini, I should say, not extracted. And this measure here gives you the extraction ratio. The actual Gini is a percent of that max. And huge ranges. I mean, Peru exceeding 100, you know. And how can it exceed 100? Well, because of subsistence. The subsistence level is probably not quite right for 400. So that's the kind of scatter of data you get, this sample. The solid line is the inequality possibility frontier, assuming that per capita income is 400. And in a minute, I'll tell you about that dotted line. But you can see the spread. First thing that should kind of jump out at you, and all we're doing is just controlling for one variable, GDP or GDI per capita, right? Nothing else. And looking at what's happening to the Gini coefficient throughout. It's kind of tight, you know, in the lower stages between, say, 500 and 1,000 GDP per capita. And then it starts drifting away. It starts pulling away from the inequality frontier. This set, Holland early, France, England, and the Netherlands, all of these, of course, are Western European early achievers. Not only that's where the Industrial Revolution started, but 400 years before that, they were already pulling away from the rest of the world, and also pulling away, apparently, from the inequality possibility frontier. When you look at levels of inequality of, say, England in 1688, they're humongous. They're huge. All you got to do is tour the English countryside and see all the castles and villas out there and know how those landed interests were grabbing a huge, huge surplus. And thus we have wonderful monuments and art as a result. But they could have done better. They could have done a lot better. They could have been way the hell up there on the inequality possibility frontier, and they weren't. They were drifting farther and farther away, whereas these groups of countries are much closer to the possible inequality that they could extract from their systems. So that's the first thing that pops out. Second thing that pops out, all the observations should be on, if this story works, you know, and the data is decent, should be on that solid inequality frontier line or below it, right? But some of them, as you can see, are off it, and all of them, I think, but one are tropical. And that is India, for example, and Bihar in India. So an alternative is to, where is it? Right, yeah. Okay, an alternative is to go to Colin Clark, who in one of his 85 volumes or edited issues, he makes an argument that the subsistence level for tropical countries, because you don't have to wear as much, you don't have to have a cellar, you don't have to eat as much and so on. You have to fight off more disease, but what the hell? Suggests that the living standard for the assumption of subsistence, survival, reproduction might be lower, and he suggested a figure like that. Okay, you use that, and now you're up to the dotted line. So that would be the inequality possibility frontier under the assumption of the subsistence income being 300, and now you're all set, except one weirdo. Pretty much all set. They're captured within that inequality possibility frontier. Yep.
The other way I was looking at that graph was to look at Holland in 1732 and Holland in 16. So the growth out here. So you've got the economy, the growth going up, but like for Holland, it looks like the increase in growth in that area.
Right.
Almost absolute, very slight, and then even proportionally, it's like where the growth was occurring, you actually reduce the GDP in terms of massive percentage.
Right.
It's just looking at same country, two countries. I can only figure out
Yeah. Sure. There's a lot of scatter in these data. You know, they're not tight, so this one explanatory variable is great, but it's not going to do the work. And you've got to have added, condition this better with additional controls, and we'll try to in a minute. But still, they share the same thing, and that is they're both now unhinged from that inequality possibility frontier. That is, they're allowing some of that surplus to slip away to folks below, and so that their Ginies are below what they could achieve, both. However, you notice a difference, and that is England starts off farther away, that is a more benign kind of system, apparently, than Holland. But what would you say? England is, about the same distance away from the inequality possibility frontier over those 150 years, whereas Holland seems to be drifting away more. So they're different systems, so we have to find out what the other variables are that ought to be added to control for these events, just like we do for any analysis. Yeah? Did I do that? The data here was the sources define the area being sampled. In that case, in 1732 as Holland, and in 1808 as the Netherlands. Holland is a subset, is it not, of the Netherlands? Right? But I'm not exactly sure what the subset is. So they're different as, political events evolve over time. But pretty much the same, I suppose. But anyway. Okay. Okay. So generally speaking, this this database is telling us the Gini doesn't rise anywhere near the same extent that the mean income does with development. So let's draw it that way, and that is I put up there those observations, the solid ones. These are our ancient inequality observations, and then added on these contemporary observations, the unfilled circles. So the ones we're looking at down here, in this case the Congo, Tanzania, and Nigeria, those three pre-industrial, low incomes seem to cluster right in there with Rome and the rest, the ancient society. You begin to look at those with some modern development experience, even China, and then they begin to drift away and obey the same law of motion. As you get to advanced development, you begin to drift away from the inequality possibility frontier. And the extraction ratio is presumably declining as time goes on. The U.S. is a very unequal society, certainly compared to New Zealand, which is not on in our database. If you guys could come up with some data, it'd be great. So we could get frontier cases, more frontier cases in here. In any case, U.S. is an unequal place, but it's vastly different from what it might be in terms of the size of the surplus that could be extracted. So let's look at the extraction ratio. And this is, I think, is really cool. I mean, what it tells you is the ancient societies, there's lots of variance in the data that we want to explain, but still, the ancient societies drop over time in terms of their extraction ratios quite steeply with early development. And then that continues, although it seems to be trying to grapple with some steady state out here. But so it starts steeply, and then steep decline around about industrial revolution slows down, and then it flattens out in levels of modern development. So our view of this is, gee, how come no one ever bothered to try to make this calculation and deal with it rather than the actual inequality? And then number two, what explains this pattern that we observe out there? Okay, so it holds when we compare the ancient with modern pre-industrial societies. That is, there's not much difference there's a lot of variance within the ancient societies, between the ancient societies, and between the modern pre-industrial societies, but not much between them. And they pretty much have the same average level of inequality.
Can I ask a question about the previous graph?
Yeah, if I can get it for you. There.
These are ratios.
Yep.
And so one thing that might be useful looking at is some measure of the size of people. So I'm thinking, we're talking, you said 155 million and a certain extraction ratio versus some other little country with that you might have a higher extraction ratio. That's one thing. Just maybe the size of the dots to tell you something about the size of the population. The other thing I'm thinking about.
So just before you go on, so you've got an international vision in your head, right? Because you want to weight these by their relative importance in world population.
The other thing is instead of concentrating on the means, the variance is struck me. I think when I'm looking to the left, I'm thinking, whoa, it's all over the map. It happens to be a long time ago, and I'm looking to the right. It's like they are on average lower, but they're also different.
Yeah.
So it's like it's not just that. It's a variance in the ratio that
Right. Good point, because I don't know, what would you expect? I would expect for pre-industrial societies to differ a lot less. They're going to have different religions and so on, and they have different culinary attributes, but they're going to have the same economic structure, basically. Very similar distribution of land ownership, maybe. That's true. Yeah, maybe not. But you see a lot more, it's true, you see a lot more variance in the black dots than you see in the empty dots. And you would have thought that modern societies, when you're comparing China and Turkey with the US and so on, you would have seen much more variance in that data. or at least the same amount, and you don't. And I think that spells trouble for empirical analysis. Because I think the amount of variance and urbanization rates and all the kind of variables you might want to throw in to try to account for the variance in the data, there's less variance. There's less variance between these economies in those attributes than between these. And so we may have problems. How it's calculated.
Like, I can see if you've got like two sort of halves, so it's quite obvious,
Right.
one gets the distance and the other one gets whatever is left over.
Yeah.
But how about modern society where we do know about the distribution? So what do you do with the frontier, not the maximum extraction. I mean, what is the frontier here for modern society?
Right. It's calculated exactly the same way, regardless of what the level of development is. And that is, subsistence level, either 300 or 400 PPP adjusted $1990. Yeah, so for this economy, the subsistence level is 300 or 400, I can't
Who do you assume has that when you get for your frontier calculation? Who do you assume will get
Right.
It makes sense for ancient society to think there are two groups, but for modern society, where do you draw the line?
Right.
I think the other side of the question, which is one that's been bubbling around for me, is your definition of the elite. Because in the modern society, where is dominant in the elite? Because a lot of the extraction in the early days may well have been fairer than the rest. But this reminds me of how much tax can you extract in the modern economy before you get sort of revolution or the change in the political party.
Good point. This is all pre-tax income, in all of it, and so we'd really like to have the fisc in there too, so to get post-tax, but we can't get that kind of information. Not for the ones that aren't filled in. It's hard to get that kind of information. So you can't do that. But good point. Because what would you expect? You expect over time, as you're looking at post-tax income and get the fisc in there, you'd expect to see this twisting down even more, right? As more modern democratic societies that reduce the extraction ratio evolve, taxes will reflect and expenditures will reflect the same thing, one would have thought, with the rise of the welfare state and all that stuff. But I don't know, I don't have that data. Good point, though. It would kind of strengthen, I think, the pattern of the extraction ratio.
I mean, in these Gabons and Nigers and modern society, they're a very large informal sector where your measures of income are not very good because they're a lot of informal
Sure.
economy. Whereas in these so-called modern economies, you've got a better measure of income.
Yeah.
And therefore you've got a better tax base to extract.
Right. Well, I guess the point is that this kind of data is the same data everybody else has to deal with in confronting any kind of inequality issue. So that is these data anyway. They haven't they haven't looked at those data. Whatever flaws there are in these data, whatever bias it might introduce in terms of interpretation, has got to be true of theirs as well. Hang on, this is a good question, and I need to deal with it better, and I can't right now. But I'm going to show you something at the end, comparative information, and see whether you like it better in terms of what I pull out.
I just want to find out, who do you classify as the ones that, are at
Yeah.
population? Is it,
Yeah, I just can't remember. I'm embarrassed. I can't remember. So I can't tell you.
It's just a constant percent, right? So, I'm printing the number here. I got .001 is your epsilon, which is the share that belongs to the group.
That's the one we use. Okay.
So it's just,
Right.
it is constant across society,
Yeah.
whether it's ancient society or modern society.
Right.
It's the same epsilon.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you're not trying to
Yeah.
modify who's the elite quote in society.
okay.
But hang on to that question, because in a minute I'm going to show you there's been an immense cottage industry that's been taking place that Atkinson has been leading in constructing top 1% 20th century and how that obeys, how the top 1% performance obeys. And the argument there is that it's all you need to explain inequality changes over time, which is a great indicator. It turns out that's not true at all of this data. So your question is going to come up again then. Okay. So there you go. But lots of variance, and no doubt there's flaws in it, but wow, lots of variance, and it's clear that it has this downward trend with this nice nonlinearity to it. I think that's just cool. Okay. So this falling extraction ratio holds when you compare the ancient with the modern pre-industrial, African, etc., societies. But also when you compare ancient to the modern societies. So we don't think the actual inequality measures we're using are very effective in allowing us to infer anything about social justice. I take it that's what we're interested in doing this. So a Gini of 40 in Rome and the same number in the U.S. just don't mean the same thing in terms of what the extraction ratio is. And the elite in the U.S. are more, they restrain themselves more than was the case of Rome. So anyway, so here are two propositions. You got one so far, and that is the ancient inequality measures were much greater. They weren't greater in terms of actual inequality, the standard run-of-the-mill Gini calculations. They're roughly the same for pre-industrial societies then and now. Lots of variance between them, but not between the two eras. So we know that's true, but that in terms of the maximum feasible inequality, humongous difference between them, and thus the extraction ratio declines over time. Here's a second proposition that actually if you see constant inequality over time, and it's the constant, this is an observation that's often made that by those who look at inequality changes over time, is how slow inequality will actually change over time, even when beset with enormous shocks. That should reflect great restraint on the elite over time as per capita incomes increase. Okay, now what about the top 1%? I mean, there's why we've been doing the Gini thing. Now let's look at the top 1% in this story. And Atkinson and then others, Piketty and others following, have argued that there's a very strong positive correlation between the top 1% share and overall inequality. And they've done it over and over and over again for a number of economies across the 20th century. And so our question was, well, okay, we've got this data now. Was it true of these ancient societies? It's true, they are looking at true distributions of income. We're not. We're holding out. We don't have the information in these social tables and so on for variance within class. So it's not quite the size distributions they have. And also, we've got to estimate the top share by assuming Pareto distributions at the top. And then if you assume that, you can extract the information you want. And there are some of them which give you the top share, 1% share, enormous range from Byzantium 1,000, almost a third occurring to the top 1%, and dropping down to Old Castile with just 7%. Which is equal to the more modern cases, and there are the cutoff points that you can look at, and there are the Gini coefficients on the other side, and you can look at those and immediately do an ocular regression between those two columns and say, hey, they're not well correlated. Well, let's actually do it. So there's a plot with the Ginis here and the top 1% there. Zip. Zip. There's absolutely no correlation between them at all. Whatever it is that Atkinson and others see for the 20th century, you do not see in this long, very long run ancient inequality data. And the sample size is about the same size as what they have for the 20th century. So we just don't find it. So they will want to tell us why we don't see it, and they do in this data. Second question is this, or this third proposition is, okay, if the top percentile is not driving overall inequality in the system, what's doing it? Well, what's doing it is going to be the size of the income gap between the elite and the poor. Not so much the numbers that are in the elite class, but rather the economic distance between the elite and the poor. That is, why do we keep focusing on share distributions? What percent of the population gets X? Let's be looking at the mean incomes within those groups and looking at the economic gaps between the groups. That's what really matters, it seems to me, especially in societies that are absorbing immigrants and all that stuff. So is this assertion true that what must be driving the Ginies that we measure for the ancient for these ancient systems got to be the ratio of average to subsistence income, or the distance between the elite and the subsistence group. And so there it is. Bingo! Strong correlation between them. So total reversal of the 20th century observation that Atkinson and his crowd are getting, and we want to know why that is so. We don't have an answer in the paper because we just saw this fact, and we'll confront them with it. Okay. So next question is, okay, great, looks interesting, but why don't you get serious with the metrics and try to add on other variables and see how you do. And so, well, we only have 21 variables. Do we have to? Yeah, we have to, so let's do it. Yep.
When you did your extraction rates using this kind of expanded Gini measure that try to take into account the variance of the different classes,
Yep.
how does that work? Like when you've got 3 classes versus 20 classes. I mean, I guess I'm asking, if you used your unadulterated Gini without, let's assume constant variable in classes, do you get exactly the same results? Are your results pretty robust for the particular Gini measure that you're using?
Yes, they are. There's very little variance, as it turns out.
So that'd be nice to see, because you got like China with 3 classes.
Yep.
But your other countries have 20, so obviously the assumptions of variance within classes is not going to be
Yep.
valid.
In fact, we've tried, for example, Brazil, what, 1871 observation has a humongous number of occupational groups, and what's reported there in that copious appendix is a squashed number, try to aggregate some of it so it's manageable. But when you reduce that to single digits by compressing social classes and just taking averages among the groups that are added to the classes, you get hardly any change in the Gini coefficients. So, all right. So, sample's small. What are you going to do? But we got to do it. So here's a starter. Okay, we got GDI per capita there. Okay, you've been seeing that all the time. Great, we get the negative sign we want. Here's the extraction ratio we're trying to explain. That's what we think matters rather than just the ho-hum Gini coefficient. So it's the extraction ratio, and you get this, we've seen that downward fall in extraction ratio with per capita income improvements. There you got it, but look, I mean, P rho value sucks, right? I'm not going to get that in the AER with that. So we got to work on that with augmenting the sample size. We're getting the right signs anyway. With more urban societies have higher levels of inequality than less so. Population density seems to have the predicted impact to the extent that populations which are more dense tend to rely less on land endowments and more on human capital and other endowments. And land is more unequally distributed than the human capital or the elite find it harder to extract, as the Jews have found out, over 2 millennia, harder to extract human capital than it is land from individuals. So we're not surprised about that, by that result. Colony, right, if you're a colony, big bang in terms of level of inequality. Causality, ooh, okay, maybe a causal problem. That is, who do you go colonize first? Maybe driving this result, so I'm not sure about, so we're just looking at the correlations here. But that's quite clearly significant. Interestingly, countries that are colonies, like Serbia, dominated by the Ottoman Turks, countries that are colonies where the foreigners are never being assessed in the information we get on the distributions, which would be Java in 1921. You don't get the Dutch in the data. You just get the locals. Or the Serbians. You just get the Serbians. You don't get the Ottoman Turks who are ruling them and so on. And when, for those cases where they're not included, it diminishes the level of inequality and a lot more than this colony effect. And we want to sort these things out and see whether we can make sense out of them. Okay, 21 observations. There you are. One addendum. Have I overshot my time, Bob? Okay. What time is it? Okay, great. Well, you're harassing me, though, so that's okay. Okay, one other issue we might want to add on to this. Like everybody else, we're just looking at annual incomes in these assessments. But of course, those observers who are giving us the social tables, I mean, they have a sense of, on average, over long periods of time, this is the average income that this group gets, right? But still, it's being reported as annual income. And you and I know we want to have lifetime incomes in making these comparisons in terms of income distributions. So what's going to matter in that? Well, it's not only going to be lifetime income patterns, but it's going to be life expectancy and morbidity is going to matter a lot. If we know short lives are brutal ones, low quality lives, so that we know that morbidity and mortality are very highly correlated. That's been confirmed over and over again. It's hard, however, getting long time series on morbidity, but it's easy getting long time series on mortality. So if they go hand in hand, we can infer things about quality of life as well as length of life in this. So the question is, how are these comparisons that I've been imposing on you between ancient and modern societies, how are they influenced when you adjust for inequality of life expectancy? Folks at the top tend to live longer than folks at the bottom, except the elite at the top, if they're fighting each other for the spoils, the males at least have very high mortality, but the women don't. They have high levels of life expectancy under those circumstances. But in any case, what happens when you adjust for this? Well, problem number one, both mortality and morbidity are endogenous to the household whose income you're measuring. So in what sense are you adding any additional information? Well, you are to the extent to which there's an exogenous component. If you live in the cities and the cities are a mess and the elite don't clean up the cities, your mortality rate is going to be really high. Yes, you'll get a higher wage to migrate into the city because you're aware you're going to get this mortality hit, but the information you have is not great, so maybe the bribe doesn't have to be all that big. So we believe that there's a big exogenous component in terms of all these elite-driven, if you wish, or as I wish, variables that are associated with the rise of the welfare state and earlier, vaccination much earlier than the rise of the welfare state, cleaning up the cities a little later, which are immensely high killers. More recently, in the last century, DDT to kill the mosquitoes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That all of these policies, some directly redistributive, like poor relief, and as Les pointed out, were dealing with pre-fisc incomes. But the others have a more direct transfers in kind, if you will, that the state is delivering, the state's controlled by the elite. So we're interested in because of that connection. Well, here's what it looks like if you've never seen any of this data. GDP per capita along here, and life expectancy from birth along there. Most of this, the variance in life expectancy and birth, is driven by what's happened to the kids. So it's child mortality rates that's doing a lot of work in this data. But still, you know, you can see these patterns. It's partly panel data. England has lots of observations over time. But they all obey the same law of motion. That is, this very steep upward drift. But note the observations out there on modern poor societies are way above the observations of these now rich early developers. So there's been a shift in this relationship between life expectancy and GDP per capita, a shift over time as well as movements along it that might be generated by all kinds of forces. So here are some life expectancy facts. Since 1600, the average survival rate between nations has changed immensely, but especially since World War I, the gap between rich and poor countries is collapsed. The biggest convergence that's taken place around the globe over the past 2 centuries has been in terms of survival rates. And life expectancy in Nigeria is immense compared to what it was in France in 1820. So that survival gap has changed, but it's also true that it's changed within societies. The survival rates within societies have compressed. So I think what this implies is that if you could adjust, we don't here, adjust the extraction rate ratio to include the survival rates in it, you'd have an even steeper decline than the one that we actually measure. So that, introducing that evidence would reinforce the story. So here are the takeaways. I think there are 4 here from this stuff. The difference in terms of the annual, just standard Gini coefficients, annual inequality for pre-industrial societies then and pre-industrial societies now, not much different. Pretty much the same. But lifetime inequality was a lot bigger in ancient societies, and it was much more unequal then than it is now. So the extraction ratio was even more bigger in the ancient economies. The top 1% is not correlated with overall inequality in our ancient inequality database, but rather it's this gap between poor people's incomes and average incomes, or elite income, that's driving it, rather than numbers, a share that are in fact in the elite group. Finally, this comes back to your point, I hope. Let's see if you like this. Okay, so now just look at the modern data and construct the extraction ratio from all the World Bank observations that they've got on the recent data, recent being what, 2002. And you get this, what we've seen in the time series, if you will, you get this downward pitch in the extraction ratio in that cross section. And now, with the fitted values in there. And now check out this. This is an effort to find a Gini, find a Kuznets curve out there in the cross section, 2002. And you squint and grunt and you can see something of a Kuznets curve. Rises up as predicted, as Kuznets did in 1995, whatever, 1955, whatever, and the decline thereafter, but wow, it's pretty fragile in the data. Well, my view is that, you know, here it is. When you measure it right, by looking at extraction ratio, and you get the downside of the Kuznets curve. Is this what we've been searching for all along? And if so, let's start asking questions about this data that's being measured by this extraction ratio, rather than this thing that people have been grunting on, including myself, been grunting on for a long time. Maybe this is the wrong way to measure it. Okay, so here's what we got to do. We have to try to impress you more by cranking up the size of the database. I gave you some indication. We probably are going to pull that off. And then we can start exploring more seriously a lot of those questions that the first round regression wasn't able to deal with with much precision. So that's where we sit. That's the end. Yeah, Les.
Your extraction ratio has sort of, it compounds the data from, gosh, you need to get that frontier right, you can get the measure right, and then it shows the difference between the two.
Yeah.
So, you might not like Kuznets, but it's only declined.
But hang on. Hang on. Because first, one of the key parameters that's going to drive that inequality possibility frontier, and thus the extraction ratio, is what are we assuming about subsistence? And the important point is not that we're picking some value. Remember, we're picking a value. We started off at $400, PPP, just at 1990 theory, and we're getting those results, and that's assumed constant over time and across countries. Even now, absolutely. And then we say, well, wait a minute, no, Colin Clark told us we ought to try 300, but we're still assuming constancy. It doesn't matter what subsistence level you assume in this calculation if you're looking at variance across these countries and over time. It won't matter. You can put it at 900, 200, 0, it's not going to matter.
It's a bit like doing GPA and saying, these technologies are transferable to this country and that country and look at all those things. Your frontier is like a data development analysis problem when you look at efficiency firms relative to the most efficient.
Well, well, let me just finish. This is what I thought your point was, and that was that, hey, I mean, come on, Jeff. I mean, the subsistence ratio, we know that changes over time. I mean, that's how we define poverty measures, you know. I mean, the level of subsistence will vary according to the culture and over time. I need a car now when I'm poor, and I didn't need a car then, you know. So if, to the extent the subsistence number is endogenous to this story and rises over time with development, then it's going to influence the extraction ratio a lot. But our view of this is, sure, but that's got to be another part of of an explanation for this decline in the extraction ratio. Because we're going to have to, somebody's got to do the hard work of the political economy and explain why it is that the elite is not able or unwilling to extract the max. And part of that will be, well, they let the subsistence ratio drift up. Or they lose their grip and yeah, well, right. Well, so we just thought, well, let's just keep it constant. And when we make the next step to try, if we can persuade people this data is decent and that we've got a fact here, and then the next step will be, all right, now, what's the political economy that's going to explain this? And part of it is going to have to deal with that subsistence figure. Societies, obviously, one One reason the Gini coefficient actually falls below the maximum the possibility frontier is because they allow the subsistence ratio to rise. So that'd be one device to ease off on the extraction ratio. Yep.
I think I roughly the same question that Laura did about his extraction ratio was trying to conceptualize the frontier. And I guess my direct question is, what sort of optimization or equilibrium problem is going on that drives that frontier, as opposed to kind of a statistical construct that's there?
Yep.
You didn't really tell a story about that, which is said in the last.
Well, the inequality frontier is mechanical,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
But
this is
we don't
what.
think it's mechanical. We think it's it's like either I'm a ruler or amongst some sort of group of, vying sort of people, and it's like there's some sort of production possibility frontier, which is, that we'd like to say, how can we get, what's the maximum we could extract?
Right.
If we acted optimally, or if that's a single agent, or if you think of some sort of equilibrium game going on with a couple of groups vying with one another.
Yeah.
And then saying, oh, out of that, these guys only got so
Right.
much, kind of thing. So
No. But to me, the interesting game, or the interesting problem, which will require games, is to explain the distance between this mechanically predicted inequality possibility frontier. This is the max these guys could crank out, and what they actually do, and then ask what devices are being used and why, and are they or are they not optimal in terms of what goals? Their own survival and power, what? And we've only just started to think about those things, I think.
But I think if you think of it as a mechanical thing, and you're like in that graph, you've got U.S. or some modern democratic Western country with a bunch of institutions in it, and given those constraints, the things, there's, what is the maximum that they can produce under those constraints or under no constraints? Or fewer
But I mean,
constraints.
those institutions are what are driving the actual genie.
The actual,
Right.
They could also drive the potential.
Well, it could. And now we're, yeah, but
That's what
I
in
think
terms
that's
of
just
what is the-
rhetorical problem, because if the inequality possibility frontier is being driven in part by the assumption about a constancy of the subsistence level, okay, in this model, right? And you believe, no, it's not. It obviously rises over time. At least the elite will influence it. Then we should somehow pull it out of there and get it into the added problem of explaining the actual genie in the story. And we thought we kind of struggled with this, how to do that. And
I just asked the question.
yeah, I know. Well, you're responsible for coming up with the answer. 'Cause we haven't been able to come up with a better alternative than using this system.
We make another run at the question that was where your dependent variable is the difference between two variables. The way that one is the frontier is constructed, it's a rising function of the GDP per capita.
Yep.
So another way of looking at your results is suppose there's no premium score, then you're just going to get your results mechanically, right? Because you're subtracting off the Gini coefficient from the frontier. If there's no relationship between Gini and GDP per capita, then the regression results just follow this mechanically. And so I think your comeback would be to say, yeah, but that's our real story is that there is no premium score. That's the real story. But I think it's worth emphasizing that your dependent variable is the difference between two variables. If there is no premium score, your results just follow one another.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think we'll use that. Right. Okay.
Any more questions? Okay, I think we have anybody who wants to, we'll go over to the staff club for drinks afterwards, so everybody's welcome to join us. Anyone wants to get a hand with you?
Thanks very much.